$600,000 can outperform a million. Not figuratively, literally by the numbers. And over the next several minutes, I'm going to demonstrate exactly why using research and data points that most financial advisors never connect to your retirement balance sheet. Before anything else, look at the basic math. $600,000 invested at age 55, earning an annual 7% return, which aligns closely with the historical long-term average of a diversified index portfolio, grows to roughly $1.18 million by age 65. Research from Wade Pfau suggests that nearly 77% of a retirement portfolio's eventual success is determined by returns earned during the first 10 years. Not by the average performance across your whole life, but by that opening decade. So the individual who retires at 65 with $1 million and immediately starts taking withdrawals has already entered a defensive position during the most vulnerable stage of retirement. Meanwhile, the person sitting on 600,000 at 55 and allowing it to compound, uninterrupted for another decade already, has momentum on their side. The aircraft is already in the air. According to the 2025 EBRI survey, 40% of retirees stopped working earlier than they originally intended. Another EBRI analysis covering 3,600 retirees between the ages of 62 and 75 found that 58% retired sooner than planned. Fidelity Investments' 2025 estimate for retiree healthcare expenses shows that the average 65-year-old retiring in 2025 is expected to spend approximately $172,500 on healthcare and medical costs during retirement, excluding long-term care. And according to AARP, the ACA subsidies that helped early retirees keep insurance premiums affordable from 2021 through 2025 expired at the conclusion of last year. That means the healthcare gap between retiring early and qualifying for Medicare suddenly became far more expensive for nearly everyone. That $1 million retirement target your advisor wrote down during your planning session is basically wearing a disguise. Once you factor in healthcare expenses, taxes, sequence risk, and the harsh truth that many people never get to choose exactly when they stop working, $1 million at 65 can easily provide less financial strength than $600,000 paired with a 10-year head start. That's the real focus of this video. Here's what I'm going to cover. There are 4 separate areas where the timing and structure of your money matter more than the raw balance itself, and each layer intensifies the next one. By the time we reach the 4th, the numbers stop feeling surprising and start becoming deeply unsettling. I'm also going to walk through a realistic example with real-world figures so you can compare it directly to your own situation. But first, I want to give you the central framework, the metaphor that ties everything together. Picture an airplane sitting on a runway. Obviously, a plane needs fuel to fly, but it also needs enough runway to gain lift. You could fill that aircraft with $1 million worth of fuel, but if the runway disappears too soon, if the company pushes you out at age 53, if a medical issue closes the runway, if timing works against you, all that fuel becomes useless. The plane sits there fully loaded and completely grounded. But a plane carrying $600,000 of fuel with a long, clear runway ahead of it can actually take off. It gains altitude. And eventually, the combination of time and momentum makes it more powerful than the plane that never left the ground. I call this the Runway Principle. Every point in this video connects back to it. Remember this sentence. The score is not the fuel. The score is the runway. In a few moments, I'm going to show you something about Social Security timing that changes retirement math by more than $200,000 in lifetime income. But first, let me introduce you to Dennis. Dennis is 53 years old. He has $500,000 inside his 401k. He works a stable middle management job at a company where he's been employed for 11 years. His plan is straightforward. Work until 65, grow the portfolio to $1 million, retire comfortably. His advisor created a projection spreadsheet. Everything looked solid. Dennis feels confident. Dennis has absolutely no idea what's coming. We'll return to Dennis shortly. But first, here's the first major reason why where your money sits matters more than how much you have. And honestly, I find it remarkable that financial media barely discusses this openly. Here's the reversal. Most people think the biggest tax challenge in retirement is minimizing taxes when withdrawing money. But the bigger issue is that millions of Americans spent decades building retirement savings inside the wrong tax structure in the first place. And there's only a limited window, mainly during your 50s, where you can meaningfully fix it. Throughout most careers, traditional advice has pushed people toward pre-tax retirement accounts like 401ks and traditional IRAs. The logic feels sensible. Get the tax deduction now and pay taxes later. But eventually, later arrives, and when it does, several problems start stacking together in ways people rarely anticipate. At age 73, the IRS requires mandatory minimum distributions from traditional retirement accounts, whether you need the money or not. If your portfolio has grown substantially, which hopefully it has if you're watching this video, those required distributions become large. That additional income pushes you into higher tax brackets. It can also trigger IRMAA surcharge increases on Medicare Part B and Part D premiums. The standard Part B premium is $22.90 in 2026, but only for individuals whose 2024 MAGI is $19,000 or below. Once you exceed that level, you move through 5 increasing surcharge tiers added on top of the standard premium. That alone can cost thousands annually, directly reducing the Social Security payments that hit your account. The tax pressure attached to a fully traditional 401k during your 60s and 70s is not a small annoyance. It becomes a structural drag that compounds year after year, and here's the painful part. In many cases, it could have been prevented if you had used a lower income window strategically. The Roth conversion ladder is the key tool here. Let me explain it in plain English. A Roth conversion ladder is a retirement strategy that lets you access retirement savings before age 59 and a half without penalties while also reducing lifetime taxes. By converting portions of a traditional IRA or 401k into a Roth IRA every year, and then waiting 5 years before accessing those converted amounts, you create a series of penalty-free withdrawals over time. The 5-year clock begins January 1st of the conversion year. So, a conversion completed early in 2025 becomes available January 1st of 2030. Once someone reaches financial independence or leaves traditional full-time employment, income often drops significantly. During that lower income phase, they can convert sections of a traditional IRA into a Roth IRA while paying taxes at far lower rates, sometimes 10%, 12%, or even effectively zero. After 5 years, each conversion becomes available tax-free and penalty-free no matter the person's age. According to analysis from Choose FY, converting $40,000 during a year where you have no earned income and remain inside the 12% tax bracket results in approximately $2,400 owed in taxes. Leave that same $40,000 inside a traditional account until age 73 when required distributions. Force it out in a 22% or 24% bracket, and the tax bill jumps closer to $800 or even $9,600. That's a $6,000 savings on just $40,000. Repeat that process for 5 years and you're saving around $30,000 in taxes you never had to pay. But the runway has to exist first. You need to begin building that ladder at least 5 years before early retirement. Many people pursuing financial independence start this process in their late 30s or early 40s, creating income systems designed to support them for decades. The opportunity still exists for someone at 55 holding $600,000 and enough time to structure things properly. But for the person who waited until 65 and is already withdrawing money to survive, that window has mostly closed or at least narrowed dramatically. There's a case I heard about through a financial planner I know. A man retired at 56 with around $800,000. Most of his coworkers thought he was retiring too early. They believed he hadn't reached the safe number yet. Instead of panicking, he spent 3.5 years systematically doing Roth conversions, carefully staying within the 12% tax bracket, preserving healthcare subsidy eligibility, and using a taxable brokerage account as a bridge. By the time he reached 59 and a half, he had accumulated more than $320,000 inside seasoned Roth accounts. That money would never face taxes again, didn't count toward MAGI, and would never trigger RMDs. Meanwhile, his friend who continued working until 65 retired with $1.3 million, sitting almost entirely inside a traditional 401k. Between ordinary income taxes, IRMAA surcharges and required distributions pushing him permanently into the 24% bracket at 73, he'll likely pay more lifetime taxes despite having the larger portfolio. Bigger number, weaker position. That's the runway principle expressed through taxes. More fuel, shorter runway, no lift. And by the way, subscribe if you enjoy this type of analysis. Otherwise, there's a good chance YouTube's algorithm won't bring these videos back into your feed. Stay with me, because the next section is probably the single biggest destroyer of retirement plans, and almost nobody models it accurately. The concept is called sequence of returns risk. It's counterintuitive enough that I want to slow down and explain it carefully because most people misunderstand investment risk entirely. You've heard for years that markets average around 7% annually over long stretches. That's true. The problem is that retirees taking withdrawals don't experience averages. They experience sequences. The order in which returns occur matters enormously. Two retirees can earn identical average returns over time, yet end up with completely different outcomes depending on whether bad market years happen early or late. Here's the mechanism. Two retirees both average 5% annually across 20 years. Each withdraws $50,000 yearly from $1 million portfolios. The only difference between them is when market losses occur. Same average return, yet the difference in ending portfolio values exceeds $665,000. The portfolio hit with poor returns early was already struggling severely by year 5. When markets fall during the first years of retirement, retirees are forced to sell larger numbers of shares at lower prices just to maintain the same withdrawals. Those shares disappear permanently and never participate in the eventual rebound. This isn't just temporary paper loss. You're liquidating assets at depressed prices while shrinking the future growth engine permanently. The portfolio that encountered the same exact returns in reverse order survived comfortably. In fact, it thrived. The outcomes diverge massively simply because the bad years happened at different times. Morningstar's data showed that if a retiree survived the first 5 years with positive investment growth, there was only about a 1 in 25 chance they would later run out of money, assuming fixed inflation-adjusted withdrawals. Those first 5 years are essentially the whole game. Now connect that to the runway principle. The person with $600,000 at 55 who hasn't started mandatory withdrawals hasn't entered the danger zone yet. They're still accumulating. A bad market at 56 hurts emotionally, but the portfolio doesn't need to sell anything. It can wait and recover while the person continues working or living from smaller taxable sources. Every year you delay Social Security reduces how much your portfolio must provide, lowering withdrawal pressure during the most fragile years. This is not a tiny detail. If you claim Social Security at age 62 in 2026, the maximum monthly benefit is $2,969. Delay until age 70 and that benefit jumps to $5,181. That's a difference of $2,212 every month for life. Waiting until 70 increases your benefit roughly 8% annually past full retirement age. Here's the calculation people rarely explain clearly enough. Increasing Social Security income by $1,000 monthly is functionally similar to adding roughly $300,000 to your retirement portfolio in terms of withdrawal replacement power. Someone delaying benefits from 62 to 70 effectively creates the equivalent of $300,000 additional retirement dollars through timing alone, not additional saving. And that option exists specifically for people who still have runway during their 50s. If someone reaches 65 with little flexibility and needs Social Security immediately, the choice has effectively already been made. The individual with $600,000 at 55 and a well-designed structure can let Social Security grow until 70 while living from a Roth conversion ladder and a modest taxable bridge. Meanwhile, the person who fought to reach $1 million at 65 and arrives exactly on schedule could enter retirement during a bear market like 2008 or the corrections in 2022, forcing them to sell investments at terrible prices while also claiming Social Security early because they need the cash flow. The runway controls the Social Security outcome. The runway controls sequence risk. The runway controls everything. Here's another massive blind spot most retirement calculators barely address. the years between leaving full-time work and qualifying for Medicare at 65. For early retirees, whether voluntary or forced, this period can quietly consume tens of thousands of dollars nobody planned for. Many retirees previously qualified for ACA subsidies based on income levels, but those subsidies expired at the end of 2025, and nobody knows whether Congress will restore them. This changed in real time between the publication of most retirement planning books and today. Without subsidies, ACA marketplace premiums for a 62-year-old in 2026 often range from $1,000 to $1,800 per month. That's full price coverage. If income stays below roughly 400% of the federal poverty level, around $62,600 for a single person in 2026, subsidies may still reduce costs. But every dollar withdrawn from a traditional 401k counts toward ordinary income for that calculation. Capital gains from brokerage accounts count too. Staying below the subsidy threshold requires careful planning that again depends on building the proper structure during your 50s. Look at the actual numbers. Retire at 62 and you face 3 years before Medicare begins. At a conservative $1,200 monthly premium, you'll spend $43,200 on ACA insurance before even walking into a doctor's office. Premiums of $12,000 to $13,000 per person annually can consume a substantial portion of retirement income. And premiums are only part of total healthcare costs. Deductibles, copays, coinsurance, and prescription expenses can easily add several thousand more every year. For a two-person household, the healthcare bridge between retirement and Medicare can realistically approach $80,000 to $90,000 across 3 years. I heard about a retired architect named Margaret whose story perfectly illustrates this. She planned carefully for decades and accumulated about $850,000. At 62, her advisor assured her she was ready to retire, and she believed she'd finally made it. What nobody explained properly was how the ACA subsidy cliff worked in her state and income situation. During her first retirement year, she paid around $920 monthly for ACA premiums. Expensive but manageable. The following year, after the enhanced subsidies disappeared, investment income from a dividend-producing brokerage account pushed her slightly above the 400% federal poverty threshold. Her monthly premium suddenly jumped to $1,680. She hadn't changed her spending at all. She simply crossed an invisible line. Her healthcare premiums climbed above $20,000 annually on a budget originally designed around $11,000. To cover the difference, she sold appreciated brokerage assets during a declining market, triggering additional capital gains that raised her income even higher, which pushed her further beyond the subsidy threshold. You can see how quickly the spiral develops. Again, the runway principle in healthcare form. Someone who built the proper structure during their 50s, using a seasoned Roth ladder to control MAGI, funding an HSA during high-income years, and building a taxable bridge designed to minimize visible income, can navigate the pre-Medicare years with dramatically lower healthcare costs. Roth EERA withdrawals do not count toward MAGI. Traditional 401k and IRA withdrawals do. If you have both account types, drawing from Roth assets first can preserve healthcare subsidies. But those decisions must be designed years earlier. You cannot suddenly reverse engineer them at age 62. The advisor who told Margaret she was financially ready wasn't wrong about the total balance. He was wrong about the positioning. Imagine sitting there right now realizing your retirement plan was built around maximizing one number, the balance itself, while largely ignoring the 4 variables that actually determine whether that balance can support your life. That's uncomfortable. Now let me show you the data behind it. Research from the Urban Institute found that over half of full-time workers in their early 50s eventually leave jobs involuntarily because of layoffs or employer-related disruptions. Health and retirement study analysis suggests that roughly 22 million Americans over age 50 either have experienced or will experience layoffs, forced retirement, or involuntary separation from work. Of those, only a little more than 2 million fully recovered their previous income levels. Pause on that. 22 million people, fewer than 2 million recovered. Around 58% of workers with only high school educations who maintained steady long-term employment into their 50s eventually faced damaging job losses or involuntary exits. But higher education barely improved the odds. Approximately 55% of workers holding college or graduate degrees experienced similar disruptions. More education doesn't protect you. Long tenure doesn't protect you. Workers between ages 25 and 34 typically remained unemployed around 19 weeks after layoffs, while workers between 55 and 64 averaged 26 weeks. The older you are, the longer the recovery gap. And among those laid off at least once, 24% never found another job at all. Now let's finish Dennis's story. About 14 months after I introduced him, Dennis, 53 years old, $500,000 inside a 401k, stable career, strong plan, his company announced restructuring. Voluntary retirement packages were offered to employees over 50. Dennis declined. 8 months later, his position was eliminated anyway. He spent 9 months searching before finally accepting a new job, paying 22% less than before. His retirement contributions slowed dramatically. His path toward $1 million by 65 never recovered. He ultimately retired at 63 with around $710,000 in a traditional retirement account, no Roth strategy, no ACA bridge, and claimed Social Security early because he needed the income immediately. The plane had fuel. The runway disappeared before takeoff. Now imagine Dennis approaching things differently. Imagine that at 53, understanding the statistics, he viewed his $500,000 not as a checkpoint toward a future number, but as an operational launch platform. Imagine he started building a Roth conversion ladder while still employed, opened and funded an HSA, and planned intentionally around delaying Social Security. The forced layoff at 54 would still have hurt, but it would have been a disruption instead of a disaster. His position would have been resilient. That's what the Runway Principle changes in practical terms. Let me walk you through a realistic case study using actual figures, specific enough to be useful, broad enough to apply to many situations. Meet Michael. He's 52 years old. He holds $380,000 total, including $290,000 in a traditional 401k, $60,000 in a taxable brokerage account, and $30,000 in a Roth IRA he opened years ago but barely funded. Household income is $115,000 annually. No pension. He expects to retire at 65. Here's the standard retirement path. Michael maxes out his 401k contributions at $24,500 yearly, plus the $8,000 catch-up contribution available at age 52. Assuming 7% annual growth, he reaches somewhere between $820,000 and $860,000 by age 65. He claims Social Security at 65 instead of 62 because he's trying to be responsible. Receiving roughly $2,100 monthly based on current averages, he withdraws around 4% annually according to conventional retirement rules. On paper, everything works. Now, here's an alternative strategy using the exact same person and money but different positioning. Michael works full-time until age 57, using every catch-up contribution available to accelerate savings. At 57, with 7% annual growth, his portfolio reaches approximately $540,000. He then transitions into part-time consulting, earning around $58,000 yearly, enough to cover living expenses without touching investments while dramatically lowering MAGI. Starting at 57, he converts $35,000 annually from his traditional 401k into a Roth IRA. With $58,000 of earned income, his combined taxable income, salary plus Roth conversions remains below the top of the 12% bracket. His federal taxes on those conversions total roughly $4,200 per year. Across 5 years, that's about $21,000 in taxes paid in exchange for $175,000 moved into Roth space and aging toward penalty-free access. At 62, the first rung of the ladder becomes available. Michael accesses those converted funds without penalties. His Social Security benefit continues increasing roughly 8% annually because he hasn't claimed it yet. His ACA premiums stay around $400 monthly instead of $1,300 because his MAGI remains controlled near subsidy thresholds. At 70, Michael files for Social Security. Thanks to strong earnings history and delayed claiming, his monthly benefit lands between $4,400 and $4,800 depending on exact earnings history, compared with roughly $2,100 had he claimed at 65. He never needed to claim early because the Roth ladder and brokerage bridge provided income without triggering Social Security earnings penalties. The difference in lifetime Social Security income between claiming at 65 versus 70 across a 25-year retirement, assuming a 4.5% COLA environment, exceeds $200,000 in nominal value. And all of it became possible because he paid $21,000 in conversion taxes earlier to build the proper structure. That's what $400,000 at 52 looks like when paired with a 10-year runway and intentional positioning. It looks completely different from simply chasing a target balance and waiting. Here's what I want you to remember from this entire video. 3 specific takeaways tied directly to everything we covered. First, calculate healthcare costs for your exact state and income situation before finalizing any retirement timeline. ACA subsidies expired at the end of 2025, and nobody knows if Congress will restore them. You cannot assume the subsidy structure from 3 years ago still applies today. Use the KFF Marketplace calculator and run the actual numbers for your zip code. If those numbers don't align with your projected MAGI, either your retirement timeline must shift or your account structure needs redesigning. The healthcare gap is not a footnote. For a 2-person household retiring at 62, it can easily total $90,000 across 3 years. Second, if you're currently between 50 and 57 and expect any lower income period ahead, semi-retirement, consulting work, a planned sabbatical, even a likely layoff you haven't admitted to yourself yet, you probably have a Roth conversion opportunity. Use it while it exists. Once income drops after leaving traditional employment, you can convert portions of a traditional IRA into a Roth IRA annually while paying taxes at dramatically lower rates, often 10%, 12%, or effectively nothing. That opportunity disappears once required minimum distributions begin at 65 or later. Third, the 58% statistic is not about fear. It's about designing a retirement plan that doesn't depend on working until exactly 65. The long-term EBRI study covering 3,600 retirees between ages 62 and 75 found that 58% retired earlier than expected. Of those, 38% cited health issues or disabilities, while 23% blamed employment disruptions. If your retirement plan only succeeds when you remain part of the 42% who work exactly as long as planned, then you haven't created a retirement strategy. You've created an ideal case scenario. The Runway Principle is simple. $600,000 at 55 with the right runway and the right structure becomes more powerful than $1 million at 65 sitting directly beside sequence risk, lacking Roth conversion history, lacking Social Security flexibility, and facing an unplanned healthcare gap. It's not the fuel, it's the runway. Quiet, boring investing created more wealth than crypto hype ever did. And to be completely clear, the people who figured this out were not doing anything flashy. They studied the dull documents. They ran real calculations. They stopped obsessing over balance size and started optimizing for position instead. The average magic number Americans believe they need to retire comfortably in 2026 is $1.46 million. Almost nobody reaches it. Median retirement savings for Americans aged 55 to 64 is around $185,000. For those between 65 and 74, it's roughly $200,000. Nowhere close to the supposed magic target. The magic number was never the right question. Position is the real question. The number was only the distraction.